Rich Mom, Poor Mom, a tale of opportunity and survival, begins the moment two mothers stand at the same school gate, wanting the same future for their children. But only one door opens. Victoria Hale is the rich mom, stepping out of a black SUV, wealth cushioning every choice she has ever made. Grace Miller's the poor mom, arriving on foot, gripping hope tighter than her worn handbag, survival etched into every breath. Both love fiercely. Both believe they are doing the right thing, but opportunity bows to one of them, while survival keeps testing the other. One child walks into privilege without noticing. The other learns early that dreams must be paid for in silence. What the rich mom doesn't know is that her opportunity was born from a sacrifice she never saw. What the poor mom hides could shatter both their lives. So who really paid the price for opportunity? And when survival finally demands the truth, which mother will lose everything? The private school gate opened with a soft mechanical hum, precise and obedient, as if it had been designed to recognize importance before humanity. A black SUV rolled forward, glossy and unmarked, the kind of car that never needed to announce itself. The tires barely made a sound against the stone driveway. Victoria Hale stepped out. Her posture was effortless, not rehearsed. Wealth had trained her body long before she understood money itself. The watch on her wrist caught the morning sun, understated, expensive, intentional. She didn't rush because nothing in her life had ever required her to. Lucas, she said calmly. Her son stepped out beside her. 10 years old, uniform crisp, shoes uncreased, backpack still stiff from newness. He smelled faintly of expensive detergent and aftershave borrowed from a father who was no longer there. Don't forget your lunch card, Victoria added, handing it over without looking. I won't, Lucas replied, already distracted by the towering school building ahead of him. The security guard smiled. Good morning, Mrs. Hale. Victoria inclined her head. The gate slid open fully, 10 feet behind them. Grace Miller slowed her steps. Her breathing wasn't heavy from distance but from calculation. How long she could stand without drawing attention. How much dignity she could afford before asking for patience. Her shoes were clean, scrubbed raw the night before, but the soles were thin, softened by years of walking routes buses never covered. She clutched a worn school folder to her chest, the edges curled, the corners taped. Emily stood beside her, small fingers wrapped tightly around Grace's hand. Her uniform was neat, carefully ironed, but faded in places Grace could never quite fix. Mom, Emily whispered, eyes scanning the tall gates, the polished cars, the children spilling out effortlessly. Is this where the rich kids go? Grace smiled gently. It's where smart kids go. She took a step forward. The gate hesitated. The guard frowned slightly at his tablet. Ma'am, there seems to be an issue with your clearance today. Grace blinked. An issue? He shifted his weight. An outstanding balance. Emily squeezed her hand tighter. From inside the gate, Victoria paused. She turned just enough to see Grace standing there, shoulders squared, pride intact, fear carefully hidden. Their eyes met briefly. Something passed between them. Not judgment, not pity, recognition without understanding. Mom, Lucas asked, tugging Victoria's sleeve, why isn't the gate opening for them? Victoria hesitated. Sometimes, she said slowly, systems make mistakes. Grace forced a smile that didn't reach her eyes. It's okay, she told Emily softly. We'll sort it out. As they turned toward the school office, Grace's fingers brushed against the bottom of her bag, against the small Bible she carried everywhere, against the sealed envelope hidden inside it, yellowed with time, unopened, heavy with answers she had been surviving without. A memory flickered uninvited, fluorescent hospital lights, a man coughing behind a curtain, her own voice begging someone who wouldn't meet her eyes. She pushed it down. The gate closed behind Victoria with a quiet finality, and in that sound, clean, controlled, irreversible, two lives were set on a collision neither mother could yet see. Grace sat on the narrow plastic chair outside the school office, knees pressed together, hands folded so tightly they had gone pale. Emily leaned against her side, swinging her legs slowly, counting tiles on the floor to distract herself. How much is it? Grace finally asked. The administrator didn't look unkind. That almost made it worse. It's just the remainder of last term's fees, Mrs. Miller. Once it's cleared, access will be restored immediately. Immediately, Grace repeated, nodding as if the word were a promise she could afford. She stood, thanked them, and walked out with her daughter before her voice could betray her. Outside, the morning had moved on without them. Engines hummed. Laughter floated. Doors opened easily for people who expected them to. Emily looked up. Am I in trouble? Grace crouched in front of her, forcing her smile back into place. No, sweetheart. You did everything right, but everyone else went in. Grace brushed a loose strand of hair from Emily's face. Sometimes, she said carefully, you arrive before the door is ready. Emily considered this, then nodded, trusting her mother the way children do, completely, and without knowing the cost. Across town, Victoria Hale sat in the back of her SUV, laptop open, fingers moving quickly as numbers and schedules obeyed her. The car glided through traffic as if insulated from inconvenience. Mom, Lucas said from the seat opposite her. Why did that woman look scared? Victoria didn't look up. Which woman? The one at the gate. With the girl. Victoria paused. The image returned to her uninvited. Grace's straight back, the way her hand tightened around her daughter's. She wasn't scared, Victoria said after a moment. She was surprised. Lucas frowned. You look surprised too. Victoria closed her laptop. I was thinking, she said. It wasn't a lie, just not the full truth. At a red light, her phone buzzed. A calendar reminder flashed briefly before she swiped it away. Settlement review. 10 years. Her jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Years earlier, in a different office with darker walls, Victoria had signed papers she hadn't fully read. She remembered the pen, heavy, engraved. The lawyer's voice, calm, efficient. The phrase standard procedure repeated until it felt meaningless. She remembered asking one question. Is everything clean? The lawyer had smiled. Legally, the light turned green. Back at the bus stop, Grace checked her phone. 3 missed calls, all from unknown numbers. She ignored them. She always did. Unknown numbers never carried good news. Emily climbed onto the bench beside her. Mom, yes. Lucas said his house has 3 fridges. Grace laughed softly. That's a lot of fridges. Emily leaned closer, lowering her voice. He said his mom never worries about money. Grace looked straight ahead. Everyone worries about something. Emily nodded, then hesitated. Do you worrying about me? Grace turned to her daughter, eyes shining. All the time. What she didn't say was how worrying had taught her to ration truth, to survive by postponing answers. How every unpaid bill pushed her closer to the envelope she refused to open. That night, in her small apartment, Grace cooked dinner slowly, deliberately, as if moving carefully could keep the walls from closing in. Emily slept early, exhausted by a day she hadn't even lived. Grace sat at the table long after the lights were off. Bible open in front of her. The envelope slipped out and landed softly on the page. She stared at it. For the first time in years, she didn't put it back. Grace did not open the envelope that night. She slid it back into the Bible with hands that trembled despite her effort to steady them. Sleep came in fragments, broken by memories she had trained herself not to touch. By morning, her body moved on instinct alone. Wake, Emily. Prepare breakfast. Tie shoelaces. Smile. At the bus stop, Emily leaned against her. Mom, can I ask you something? Grace nodded. Double quotes. Why do you keep that envelope in your Bible? Grace's breath caught for half a second. Because, she said carefully, some things are too heavy to carry everywhere. Emily accepted this answer easily. Children often did. They trusted weight they couldn't see. Across the city, Victoria stood in her walk-in closet, staring at a row of black dresses. She selected one without thinking. Sharp lines, tailored strength. Her assistant's voice echoed in her head from the night before. The board expects clarity. Clarity. The word felt sharp. As she dressed, her eyes flicked briefly to the locked drawer beneath the mirror. She hadn't opened it in years. Inside were documents she told herself were finished, resolved, buried. She closed the drawer harder than necessary. At school, Emily was finally allowed in. The gate opened as if nothing had happened. Systems corrected themselves quietly, without apology. In class, Lucas slid into the seat beside her. You're back. Emily nodded. My mom fixed it. Lucas smiled. She always does. Emily smiled back, then paused. Does your mom fix things too? Lucas thought for a moment. She hires people too. The words weren't cruel. They were simply true. During recess, Emily noticed something odd. Lucas carried a key on a thin chain around his neck, tucked into his shirt. When another boy asked about it, Lucas closed his fist around it instinctively. It's nothing, he said quickly. That night, Grace finally opened the envelope, not fully, just enough to glimpse the letterhead. Her knees gave way, and she sat on the kitchen floor, the paper trembling in her hands. A company name she recognized too well. A date burned into her memory. A signature that didn't belong to her husband. Her mind flooded backward, fluorescent lights, antiseptic air, Daniel's cough echoing too loudly in a room that smelled like endings. The way the nurse avoided her eyes when she asked about payment plans. The way a man in a suit had stood at the door once, watching, saying nothing. Grace folded the paper back immediately. As if looking longer would shatter something irreparable, she pressed the envelope to her chest and whispered, "I didn't know," miles away. Victoria sat alone at her dining table, staring at an untouched meal. Lucas had gone to bed hours earlier. The house felt larger when it was quiet. Her phone buzzed, and no number. She stared at it. It buzzed again. She declined the call, then froze when a voicemail notification appeared. She didn't listen yet. Instead, she poured herself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like distant signals. Somewhere in the dark, two mothers were circling the same truth, one by survival, the other by denial, and neither realized how close they were to colliding. Grace did not tell Emily about the letter. She moved through the following days as if nothing had changed, though everything had. Survival had taught her how to wear normalcy like armor. She still woke before dawn, still packed lunches with careful portions, still kissed Emily's forehead with the same tenderness. But now, every routine carried an undercurrent, a silent question humming beneath each action. At the seamstress shop where she worked nights, Grace's hands shook as she threaded needles. The rhythm that once calmed her now betrayed her thoughts. Fabric blurred into hospital curtains. The hum of machines became the echo of a monitor flatlining. "You all right?" her supervisor asked. Grace nodded too quickly. "Just tired." Tired was safe. Tired required no explanation. Across town, Victoria sat through a board meeting she had led 100 times before. Yet for the first time, her voice faltered. Charts glowed behind her. Numbers climbed obediently. Applause followed, automatic, expected. But her gaze drifted to the conference table's reflection. For a brief second, she saw not a CEO, but a younger woman gripping a pen too tightly, signing papers she hadn't truly understood. A memory pressed forward. Her husband, Richard Hale, standing in their kitchen years ago. Jacket still on, face pale. "They're offering a settlement," he had said. "Quick. Quiet," Victoria had asked. "Who was hurt?" Richard hesitated. "A dock worker." It was complicated. She hadn't asked his name. Back in the present, Victoria's assistant leaned toward her. "The legal review is scheduled for next week. Just routine." Victoria nodded. Routine again. That afternoon, Emily waited after class while Grace finished cleaning offices nearby. Lucas sat beside her on the low stone wall. "My mom says we might move," he said suddenly. Emily's eyes widened. "Why?" Lucas shrugged. She didn't say. "Just that sometimes you leave places before they change." Emily thought of the envelope she'd seen slip from her mother's Bible days ago. Do grown-ups ever lie because they're scared? Lucas kicked at a pebble. "My mom says fear is for people without options." Emily didn't respond. She was thinking about how fear had options of its own. That night, Grace finally unfolded the letter completely. The words were, "Clinical, polite, devastating. Compensation, approved. Liability reassigned, acknowledgement of service." Daniel's name appeared only once at the bottom, as a witness, not a beneficiary. Grace's breath broke as the full truth anchored itself in her chest. Her husband had signed away his own chance to live so someone else could walk free. Not for money, not for reward, for silence. She saw him again, weeks before he died, pressing the Bible into her hands. "Keep this close," he had said. "Some truths don't save you. They save others." Grace had laughed then. She wasn't laughing now. Across the city, Victoria finally listened to the voicemail. A woman's voice. Calm, controlled. "We need to talk about the Miller file." Victoria closed her eyes. The past had stopped waiting. Grace did not sleep. She sat at the small kitchen table long after the apartment fell quiet. The letter spread before her like a wound that refused to close. Every word felt heavier now that it had context. Daniel's handwriting at the bottom, steady, deliberate, hurt the most. He had known. He had signed anyway. A flashback surfaced uninvited. Daniel sitting on the edge of their bed, struggling to breathe, joking weakly as Grace scolded him for pretending everything was fine. His hand had found hers, squeezing once, a silent request she hadn't understood then. "Promise me," he'd said, eyes fixed on the floor. "Promise what?" "That no matter what happens, Emily gets a future." Grace had promised without hesitation. Now she understood the price. The next morning, She walked Emily to school herself, ignoring the bus schedule, choosing the longer route. Every step felt intentional, as if movement alone could keep the truth from crushing her. At the gate, the guard nodded this time. The system recognized her again. Emily paused before going in. Mom, yes. If someone did something bad a long time ago, but they were trying to help someone else, does that make them bad? Grace knelt, heart tightening. It makes them human. Emily nodded, satisfied, and ran off. Grace stayed behind a moment longer, watching the children disappear inside, all those futures moving forward at once. Across town, Victoria sat in her lawyer's office, hands folded in her lap. The walls were the same muted gray as years ago, the same calming tone meant to soften consequences. The Miller file was sealed correctly, the lawyer said. There was no wrongdoing on your end. Victoria's voice was steady. Was there wrongdoing on someone else's? A pause, small, telling. There was. Reassignment, he said. At the request of your husband. Victoria felt the air thin. Reassigned to whom? The lawyer hesitated. A dock worker. Daniel Miller. The name landed hard. Victoria repeated it slowly, as if saying it carefully might soften the impact. What happened to him? The lawyer confirms it quietly. He passed away. Victoria's mind raced backward. The settlement, the speed, the insistence on discretion. The way Richard had avoided her eyes that night. Why wasn't I told? She asked. Because you didn't ask, the lawyer replied gently. That afternoon, Lucas waited alone at school longer than usual. When Victoria finally arrived, she didn't apologize. She didn't scold. She looked distracted. Mom, Lucas said as they drove. Are we in trouble? Victoria glanced at him. Why would you think that? You only get that quiet when something's wrong. She smiled faintly. You're very observant. He hesitated. The girl I told you about, Emily, she worries about her mom a lot. Victoria tightened her grip on the steering wheel. That evening, Grace received an email. No subject line. Just one sentence. We need to talk about Daniel Miller. Grace closed her eyes. Somewhere between opportunity and survival. The silence was finally breaking. Grace read the email 3 times before she let herself breathe. We need to talk about Daniel Miller. No name. No explanation. Just certainty. She didn't reply immediately. Survival had taught her that urgency often belonged to people with power. Instead, she folded laundry, washed dishes, listened to Emily hum softly in the next room as she did her homework. Normalcy first, panic later. But when Emily appeared in the doorway holding her workbook, Grace's hand stilled. Mom, can you help me with this? Grace nodded, pulling her close. The page was about cause and effect. Emily read aloud, slowly. If one thing happens, it can change many other things. Grace swallowed. That's right. Emily looked up. Even if the people don't know each other. Yes, Grace said quietly. Especially then. That night, Grace replied to the email with just 2 words. When and where. Across the city, Victoria stood alone in her late husband's study for the first time in years. Dust clung to the shelves. The room smelled faintly of leather and old decisions. She opened a drawer she had avoided since the funeral. Inside were copies of documents she had never read fully. Her fingers moved faster now, hungry, searching. She found Daniel Miller's name again. And again. Each time, it felt less abstract. A knock interrupted her. Mom? Lucas stood at the door, pajama-clad, and sure, I couldn't sleep. Victoria hesitated, then opened her arms. Lucas crossed the room and hugged her, pressing his face into her side. You're shaking, he said. Victoria closed her eyes. I think, she said slowly, I made it through life by not asking certain questions. Lucas pulled back to look at her. Are you going to ask them now? She looked at her son, really looked at him, and understood something too late. Yes, she said. I have to. The next day at school, Emily collapsed during morning assembly. It wasn't dramatic. No scream. Just a quiet sway, then her knees buckling beneath her. Grace heard her name shouted from across the courtyard. Time fractured. Emily lay pale against the concrete, her breath shallow, her fingers cold. Grace knelt beside her, whispering her name, her voice shaking despite her effort to stay calm. It's okay, Grace said, though nothing was. Mom's here. An ambulance arrived. Sirens cut through the air like accusations. From across the crowd, Victoria watched, frozen, as Lucas pointed. That's Emily, he said. That's her mom. Victoria's chest tightened. The name Daniel Miller echoed in her mind with sudden clarity. At the hospital, Grace paced the hallway as doctors moved efficiently around her daughter. Tests, machines, words she recognized too well. She needs treatment, the doctor said carefully. Soon. How much? Grace asked. The doctor hesitated. Grace nodded. She already knew what hesitation meant. Hours later, Victoria sat alone in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring at the hospital entrance. She finally understood where opportunity had led her, and who had been surviving in its shadow. Grace sat beside Emily's hospital bed, counting each rise and fall of her daughter's chest as if numbers could keep her alive. Machines hummed softly, indifferent to fear. The room smelled of antiseptic and something else Grace recognized instantly: memory. Hospitals had a way of collapsing time. Emily stirred. Mom, I'm here, Grace said immediately, leaning forward. Emily's eyes searched her face. Am I going to miss school? Grace forced a small laugh. You might get a few days off. Emily frowned. Lucas will be mad. We're supposed to finish our project. Grace brushed her fingers through Emily's hair. Lucas will understand. But Grace wasn't sure she would. In the hallway, Grace finally answered the unknown number. This is Grace Miller. A pause. Then a woman's voice, composed, controlled, unfamiliar. Mrs. Miller. My name is Victoria Hale. Grace closed her eyes. Yes, Victoria continued. I believe. Our families are connected. The word connected landed wrong. Too clean. Too late. Where? Grace asked. No anger. Just exhaustion. Here, Victoria said softly. I'm at the hospital. Grace ended the call without another word. Minutes later, Victoria stood outside the room, hesitant. For the first time in years, she didn't know how to enter a space. The door felt heavier than boardrooms and contracts ever had. Grace opened it herself. They faced each other truly this time. Victoria looked smaller without her office, without distance. Grace looked stronger than Victoria expected, forged by years of pressure. I didn't know, Victoria said immediately. About Daniel. About any of it. Grace studied her face, searching for deceit. She found something else instead. A woman standing at the edge of a truth she could no longer outrun. Knowing late. Grace said quietly, doesn't endurely. Victoria nodded. I know. Silence stretched between them, thick and fragile. I can help, Victoria said. With the treatment. With everything. Grace's jaw tightened. This isn't charity. I'm not offering charity, Victoria replied. I'm offering responsibility. Emily stirred again, eyes fluttering open. She looked from Grace to Victoria. Mom, she whispered. That's Lucas's mom. Grace didn't deny it. Victoria stepped forward cautiously. Hello, Emily. Emily studied her, then said, You look sad. Victoria's throat tightened. I am. Emily nodded, as if that made sense. My mom gets sad too. But she doesn't stop. Grace closed her eyes. Outside, Lucas waited on a bench, feet swinging nervously. When Victoria finally emerged, he stood. Is Emily okay? She will be, Victoria said. Because she has to be, Lucas frowned. Are we part of the problem? Victoria knelt in front of him. We're part of the answer now. As Grace returned to Emily's bedside, the envelope slipped from her. Bag onto the floor. Victoria saw it. Recognized the letterhead instantly. The final truth was no longer avoidable. The envelope felt heavier in Victoria's hand than it had any right to. She hadn't picked it up at first. She'd only stared at it on the hospital floor, the familiar letterhead pulling her backward through time. The font, the spacing, the legal neutrality that once made her feel safe, now it made her feel complicit. Where did you get that? Victoria asked quietly. Grace didn't look up from Emily. It was given to me the day my husband died. Victoria inhaled slowly. Have you read it? Yes, Grace said. Recently. That single word carried years of restraint, of survival built on delay. Victoria stepped back into the hallway, the envelope still in her hand. She read every line this time, not skimming, not trusting summaries. Every clause sharpened into clarity. The reassignment, the indemnity. The silence purchased cheaply. Her husband's signature sat near the top. Daniel Miller's sat at the bottom. Witness. Not beneficiary. Victoria's knees weakened. She braced herself against the wall. A flashback hit her hard. Richard standing by the window years ago, city lights cutting his face in half. It's handled, he'd said. No one gets hurt. She had believed him because belief was convenient. At the nurse's station, Grace spoke with the doctor again. The treatment is possible, he said. But the timeline is tight. Grace nodded. How tight? The doctor hesitated. Days. Not weeks. Grace thanked him, her face calm. Her hands shaking only after she turned away. That evening, Victoria made a call she had avoided her entire career. I want the settlement reopened, she said. Publicly, there was silence on the other end. That will attract attention, the voice warned. It will affect your position. Yes, Victoria replied. That's the point. When she returned to the room, Grace looked up. What are you doing? What I should have done a decade ago, Victoria said. Telling the truth. Grace studied her carefully. Truth doesn't save everyone. No, Victoria agreed. But lies have already killed someone. Outside the hospital, reporters gathered by morning. Whispers traveled faster than facts. A powerful executive. A buried settlement. A dead dock worker. Lucas watched from the car as cameras flashed. Is this because of us? He asked. Victoria met his eyes. It's because of what we ignored. Inside, Emily slept through it all, unaware that the world was rearranging itself around her fragile heartbeat. Grace sat beside her daughter, holding her hand, feeling the quiet strength of a promise she had made years ago, one she would not break now. No matter the cost, the story was no longer just about opportunity. It was about who survived the truth. The hearing room was colder than Grace expected. Not in temperature, but in tone. The walls were pale, stripped of comfort, designed to make truth feel procedural. Grace sat in the second row, hands folded, eyes forward. She wore her best dress, not new, but pressed with care. Emily was still in the hospital. Grace had kissed her forehead before leaving, promising she would be back before dinner. Promises mattered now more than ever. Across the room, Victoria sat alone at the front table. No assistants. No legal buffer. Just her, the documents, and the weight of her name. Cameras were not allowed inside, but their presence pressed in from the outside like a held breath. When Victoria stood to speak, the room stilled. My name is Victoria Hale, she began. Her voice was steady, but not rehearsed. For years, I benefited from a settlement I did not question deeply enough. I told myself legality was the same as morality. She paused, just long enough for the silence to stretch. It wasn't. Grace felt something loosen in her chest, not relief, not forgiveness, but recognition. This was the sound of someone finally standing where the truth could reach them. Victoria continued, outlining the reassignment. The silence clause, the name that had been buried beneath paperwork. Daniel Miller. At the sound of his name, Grace's fingers tightened together. A memory surfaced, Daniel laughing softly in their kitchen, saying, some doors only open when someone else steps back. She hadn't understood then. She did now. When the session ended, Victoria didn't leave immediately. She stepped down from the table and approached Grace slowly, carefully, as if afraid of crossing an invisible line. I've resigned, Victoria said. Effective immediately. Grace studied her. And the treatment? It's funded, Victoria replied. Fully, independently of this. Grace nodded once. Good. No thank you. No absolution. Outside, Lucas waited on the steps, shoulders tense. When he saw Victoria, he stood. Are we still rich? He asked quietly. Victoria knelt to meet his eyes. We're still safe, she said. And we're still responsible. Lucas considered this. Is that better? Yes, she said. It is. Back at the hospital, Grace returned to Emily's bedside just as the doctor entered. We're ready to begin, he said. Grace took Emily's hand. You hear that? You're very brave. Emily smiled weakly. You promised I'd be okay. Grace leaned close. I keep my promises. As the doctor prepared the equipment, Grace looked through the glass wall of the room. For a moment, she thought she saw Daniel standing there, not as he was at the end, but as he had been before the sickness, smiling, proud, at peace. Then he was gone. Opportunity had finally been named. Survival was finally being honored. And both mothers understood that neither came without cost. Morning light filtered through the hospital window, softer than Grace remembered it ever being. The machines still hummed, but their rhythm had changed, steadier now, less urgent, like breath finding its way back to itself. Emily slept peacefully, color slowly returning to her cheeks. Grace sat beside her, exhaustion settling into her bones in a way that felt earned. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to lean back, to rest without listening for alarms. The doctor had said the words she had been holding her breath for. She's responding well. Grace closed her eyes when she remembered them, letting the relief pass through her fully. Survival, she realized, wasn't just about enduring pain. Sometimes it was about allowing hope to stay. Later that day, the school gate opened again. This time, Grace walked through it without hesitation. Emily held her hand, smaller now in a hospital bracelet, but lighter somehow. The shoes were still worn. The uniform still faded. But Grace's posture had changed. Not proud. Not defiant. Grounded. Across the courtyard, Victoria stood waiting. No SUV idling behind her. No assistant hovering nearby. She wore a simple coat, unremarkable, almost anonymous. Lucas spotted Emily first. He waved awkwardly, then jogged over. "You're back," he said, relieved. Emily smiled. "I told you I would be." The children ran ahead, their voices blending into the sound of 100 other futures unfolding at once. Grace and Victoria stood side by side, not touching, not distant. "I sold the house," Victoria said quietly. "Not because I had to. Because I needed to know what staying felt like without hiding." Grace nodded. "Staying is harder than leaving." "Yes," Victoria agreed. "It is." They watched the children disappear into the building, through the same door, under the same roof. Opportunity had finally leveled itself. Survival had finally been seen. Grace reached into her bag and removed the envelope one last time. She didn't hand it to Victoria. She tore it carefully, deliberately, and dropped the pieces into a nearby bin. Daniel's sacrifice had already done its work. It didn't need to live forever as paper. "My husband believed silence could protect people," Grace said softly. "He was wrong about that. But he was right about one thing." Victoria waited. "He believed survival was worth more than comfort." Victoria swallowed. "I believed comfort was the same as safety." They shared a look, not forgiveness, not friendship. Understanding. The school bell rang. Grace turned to leave, then paused. "We won't be friends," she said honestly. Victoria nodded. "I wouldn't expect us to be. But," Grace continued, "our children will be." Victoria smiled, small but real. That might be enough. As Grace walked away, she felt something unfamiliar settle in her chest. Not wealth. Not victory. Peace. Behind her, Victoria remained standing, watching the gate open and close. Open and close, finally understanding that opportunity without accountability was fragile, and survival without truth was incomplete. And somewhere between the two, a future had finally found room to breathe.